Hello everyone and welcome to iCriticLive. This is the podcast where we talk about entertainment, pop culture, and life in between. I'm your host, Kevin T. Rodriguez, film critic of iCritic.net. Thank you so much for spending a few minutes of your time here with me today. And before we get into today's podcast, if you are listening to this podcast on the YouTube channel, the iCritic YouTube channel, we're going to experiment with something a little different today. We are going to have a visual component. Now, you do not have to visually see what's going on. This is still primarily a podcast. But I have noticed that people on Buzzsprout have definitely been responding very well to the podcast and have been downloading it and subscribing. And thank you so much for doing so. But on YouTube, the podcast is not doing quite as well. At least not as well as the other videos I make with visuals. And I think it's because YouTube is primarily a video platform, so people expect there to be a visual component about, with at least something there, more than just the podcast image. Now, that does not mean that we are going to do this for everything. This is just a little test, just to see how people respond. But if you are listening to this on YouTube podcast, you can still do so audibly. It will not change the experience. However, you can also watch it on YouTube and have a visual component. All right, with that out of the way, let me share a story. So there was a time, sometime like a year and a half ago, where we were with some friends, and somehow the topic of, and a plane just flew over, of course it did. We were talking about credit card points, specifically how much I love my American Express card, and I love collecting points for this. And this friend, who's admittingly a little old school, but very smart and intelligent, said that he did not understand the whole thing about points. He's like, what's a point? What is a point worth? Now, I was explaining how the points work, and I'll kind of give just a Cliff Notes version. I'm like, well, okay, look, the thing with points is that, you collect them, and then you can use them as kind of like redemption things, and if you transfer the points to certain partners, the points might be worth more money, yada, yada, yada. And he still wasn't really getting it, but he did say, so what's the value of a point? That's what I don't really understand. And I said, well, look, at the end of the day, the minimum value of what a point will be is a penny. Now, in the terms of service, they say that points have no value, but if you're going to redeem them, it's typically a penny a point, and that's what it is. It's kind of like a reward for using the American Express card. Now, why am I bringing this story up in a podcast about movies? Are we going to start talking finances? No. If you want to hear more about my financial opinions, you can go to the Entrepreneur channel on YouTube. The reason I am bringing this up, though, is because ever since the streaming wars have begun, and especially with Netflix, which is our main topic today, CEO Ted Sarandos has basically defended Netflix's business model based on viewerships. Like, this got this many views and this many views. And the question, of course, comes up is like, well, what is the value of a view? What do views actually mean financially or even culturally in the streaming age? I mean, it used to be very, very simple to figure out the value of a movie. How many tickets it sold the box office, how many VHS, then DVD and Blu-rays you could sell of the movie after the theatrical box office. Heck, you could even point to TV airings and how much the company paid for that airing. I mean, one of like the big stories, I remember like a day or two after Shrek, the original Shrek, opened to surprise box office numbers, and Comcast did not yet own DreamWorks Animation, NBC purchased the broadcast rights for Shrek like 4 or 5 years down the line, something like that, for $20 million right off the bat. So it's like that showed a definite value of the movie. Like, NBC felt that movie was worth $20 million and that they would potentially make that, if not more, when the movie would eventually air on NBC. So the finances in movies used to make a lot more sense. And then you have streaming come along and everything's a buffet and everything. And it's like, what does a view mean anymore? And the reason that I asked this question is because in this article from Deadline called Ted Sarandos defends Netflix's tough stance on theatrical releasing, written by Jill Goldsmith. He continues to defend basically shunning theatrical releases unless you go to the Bay Theater in Santa Monica, which, if you are able to do that, I highly recommend you do. Most Netflix movies are still better in theaters than on Netflix, but you know my stance on that. And the quote that they use in the headline is, "We are in the subscription streaming business and you can see our results." And that's a pretty bold claim, and we're going to look at that bold claim. But let's look at this Deadline article first. So the article reads, Netflix co-CEO Ted Sarandos defended the streamer stance on theatrical. That is, mostly skipping it, assuring Wall Streeters on a quarterly earnings call Thursday that it's good business. And he says, "Look, I'm just going to reiterate, we are in the subscription streaming business, and you can see our results. It's a pretty good business, and it appeals to a very large segment of consumers and fans. Our top 10 films that premiere on Netflix all have over 100 million views, among the most watched films in the world. It's our desire to keep adding value to our consumers for their subscription dollar. We believe that not making them wait for months to watch the movie that everyone's talking about, that adds value." I think Disney would disagree with you, Ted. It seems like delaying the gratification of Inside Out 2 and Deadpool vs. Wolverine on premium video on demand and Disney Plus actually made those movies more money in theaters and also raised their demand for streaming. But I'm just throwing that in there. I really should let the man talk uninterrupted. Okay, so let's continue. So what we do for filmmakers is we bring them the biggest audience in the world for their films, and then we help them make the best films of their life. You know, on some level, I don't entirely disagree with that. Some directors' movies like Scorsese and Fincher have made some of their best films with Netflix, and they were brought to wide audiences. That could be any one of the 9 Best Picture nominee films that we've released so far, or it could be any of those top 10 films that are as big as billion-dollar box office movies. Yeah, interesting thing about those Best Picture nominees. First of all, pretty much all of them were released in theaters. They were given small theatrical windows like, The Irishman, Roma, The Power of the Dog. I actually saw these movies in theaters because Netflix gave them theatrical runs. I did see Mank on Netflix first. That was a COVID era, so COVID year, so it made sense to do it there. But most of their Best Picture nominees are in theaters, at least for a little bit amount of time. So, and what about their movies that are not nominated for Best Picture? Well, we'll get to that in a minute. So let me reread that quote, though, because I kind of cut it off mid-sentence. That could be any of the 9 Best Picture nominee films that we've released so far, or it could be any of those top 10 films that are as big as billion-dollar box office movies. Now, you read a quote like that, and you have to wonder, how does this man make $50 million? Does he not see the idiocy in that statement? Our top 10 films are as big as the billion-dollar box office movies, and it's like, okay, so why aren't those movies making an additional $10 billion for Netflix? If these movies are just as big as billion-dollar box office movies, then why aren't they making the $1 billion in theaters? Why don't investors push back on things like that? Because, I've talked about this before, and I talked about his stupid stance, how Barbenheimer would have been just as big on Netflix had it come on Netflix first. And my whole thing is, and I do it in my Mr. Krabs voice, maybe it would have been as big, but it would have been without the money. So I don't understand quotes like this and why Wall Street investors don't push on it a little bit. Those movies are just as big as billion-dollar hit films? Well, why aren't they in theaters making us an extra $1 billion then? So anyway, let's continue. His response was to a question from Lightshed analyst Rick Greenfield, who was gently mocked for asking if it's possible for films to, quote, pierce the cultural zeitgeist without a theatrical release. And Tarandos responded, "Thank you for that question again. I'm sure that we can continue to pierce the zeitgeist and have those moments in the culture, even when those moments begin on Netflix." So what he's basically saying to these investors, aside from the fact that, yeah, our movies are as big as the billion-dollar films, we're just not making the $1 billion per film. We're spending $250 million on most of these films. We're just not making that money back. Whatever. That's a dumb thing. But he's also saying, oh, look, we have movies that pierce the cultural zeitgeist, and they begin on Netflix. And I had to wonder, like, is that true? Do the movies really pierce the cultural zeitgeist? And again, what is the value of a view? We'll continue that question in a minute, but let's go to Netflix's most popular lists. And, so this is Netflix's official site. If you can see it. If you can't, I'm on Netflix's official site. And they have popular lists for their most popular English films, their most popular non-English films, their most popular TV English, and their most popular TV non-English. Now, I'm going to ignore the TV list because here's the thing. Unlike movies, I see a lot of value for a TV having millions upon millions of views, especially now that Netflix has ads. If you are selling ads, numbers in the hundreds of millions could definitely be very, very good for a streaming service. Now, I think this is also an admission by Netflix because at one point Netflix said they were never going to put ads on Netflix. They didn't need ads. They just had a different business model than the TV networks. And now they've got ads. So I keep that in the back of your head. But let's look at their most popular films in English. So their most popular film in English is Red Notice, which has 230.9 million views. Now, if there were 230.9 million people buying tickets, that would be a crap ton of money, and that would be great. But most people, if they've heard of this, admit that it's bad. It's not very good. And again, okay, so 230.9 million people have watched it. What value does that bring to Netflix? Did 230 million people sign up for Red Notice, or did they just watch it because it was partly there? Again, it's a murky issue. Without ads, that number doesn't mean anything, and I don't think people like this movie very much. Number 2 was Don't Look Up. Now, there's a drastic drop at this point to 171.4 million views. That's almost 60 million views less. Now, this one did start in theaters. I actually saw this movie first in a Cinemark on my birthday at 9 a.m. It was nice when Netflix was doing that deal with Cinemark. Maybe I'll have to do an episode about why that Netflix Cinemark deal likely came to an end. If you want it, leave it in the comments section or send me a fan mail through Buzzsprout, whatever way you have to reach out to me. But yeah, this was a Best Picture nominee for some reason. I mean, I actually kind of liked it, but it wasn't a Best Picture worthy nominee. And it's okay, that was theaters first. Number 3, The Adam Project. So I've seen this. This is good. I'm not going to lie. It is good. I don't know anyone who talks about it anymore. It was like a brief fart in the wind. The number 4 is the only one that I can say, okay, this one actually pierced the zeitgeist without a theatrical release. And that was Bird Box with Sandra Bullock. It had 157.4 million views. I honestly thought it would have more, if I'm being honest. This is one of the few times where it's this movie was talked about, people remember it. It primarily helped because of that very stupid Bird Box challenge that do not do that if you look this up. I know I'm mentioning it, but I strongly encourage everyone not to look it up. And if you do look it up, do not do it. But okay, this one pierced the cultural zeitgeist. But again, what value did that bring to Netflix? Did anyone sign up just to watch this movie? We don't know. This number doesn't mean anything. Number 5, Leave the World Behind, with 143.4 million views. Okay, look, I heard about this one. I did, and it was talked a little bit because the Obamas produced it, and so you had conservative people just kind of going like, is this real or not? But otherwise, yeah, this is not this I wouldn't say pierced the cultural zeitgeist. And then you have The Gray Man. If people remember this one, it's because of how terrible it is. It had 139.3 million views, no theatrical release. I think Leave the World Behind had the briefest of theatrical releases, but not much. I don't think The Gray Man really did. I don't hear anyone talk about it, except if they have seen it, it's like, oh yeah, that was terrible. Number 7, Damsel at 138 million views. I have not heard of Damsel. I'm not going to lie. I've not heard of this movie. I don't know anyone who's brought it up. So I have nothing to say about that. We Can Be Heroes, 137.3 million views. I have also not heard of this one. Looks like it's a kids movie. If you can see the screen, then you see there's a bunch of kids there. If not, there's a bunch of kids there. It looks like a kid's science fiction film. But is this what piercing the cultural zeitgeist look like? I mean, we got to like number, what, 3? Like, I mean, number 1 and 2 definitely, like, people have heard of them, and 3 some people have. You get to 4 and it's like, okay, people definitely heard. But then you get to 5 and it's like, there's a question if a lot of people have heard or seen this. And then you get to 6 and it's like, have people seen this? And then you get to 7, it's like, have people heard of this one? 8, have people heard of this one? Number 9, The Mother. I haven't heard of The Mother. It's number 9, apparently the most watched film on Netflix in English. 136.4 million views. And then you get to 10. Oh, this is great. Glass Onion, A Knives Out Mystery, 136.3 million views. This one had the famous 1-week theatrical release that way overperformed what people thought it would. And instead of capitalizing on that, Netflix was kind of like, yeah, we know we're going to leave millions of dollars on the table, but this just isn't our business. It's like, well, why can't it be? Seriously, Wall Street, start grilling them. Now, just for fun, I'm going to look at the non-English films. Number 1 is Troll at 103 million views. Never heard of that one. Under Paris, 102.3 million views. Haven't heard of it. Society of Snow, did see this one. 98.5 million views. Very good movie, by the way. Probably helped because of the Oscar nominations. Nowhere at 85.7 million views. Okay, haven't heard of that one. The Platform, 82.8 million views. Haven't heard of that one. Through My Window, 61.1 million views. Haven't heard of this one. Aka, 60.9 million views. Haven't heard of that one. Blood Red Sky, 60.9 million views. Haven't heard of that one. My Name is Vendetta, 56.4 million views. I think I have heard of this one, but I haven't seen it. And then you have Black Crab, 53.9 million views. So, I mean, granted, I know things are different for international films. You just don't know what people are going to watch. But, yeah, like, except for Society of Snow, that one didn't enter the zeitgeist. I don't even know if the zeitgeist was... Now, I'm going to click the global top 10. Okay, so it's the same. And okay, this is a current thing that's going on right now, so it's not relevant. But again, you will probably notice if you were listening or watching that, you know, when it comes to the most popular, it's like, okay, well, at least 2 of those movies were released in theaters. One of them quite widely, and you know, it's there. Like Leave the World Behind, I think that was in theaters for a little bit, and so was The Gray Man. They made it, but it's like this whole thing where it's like, oh, we contribute to the zeitgeist. No, you're not, except for Bird Box and the one movie that you really pushed in theaters for that week. You really haven't pierced much of anything. Yeah, people watch them, but like I haven't heard of many of these, and the ones that I have seen and heard of, most of them are not good. And it's like, is this what Netflix is bringing? Is this their business model? It's like, oh, we're bringing you like the worst movies that are watched the most. I mean, and the thing about Netflix that's strange, and why he's making this argument at a stockholder meeting of all things, is because it's like, look, the whole point of having these Wall Street stockholder shareholder meetings is that you explain how the business makes money. Now, Netflix did pretty good. They added an extra 5 million subscribers, but the thing is, these views still don't mean anything. We're not sure how these views bring money, which is why they're bringing up, why aren't you putting these movies in theaters? Why aren't you just making a little extra money on these movies? Like, what value does a movie bring to Netflix if it's an original? If it's a TV show that's original, again, perfectly different. Like, if you go to, like, their most popular TV shows, and they have things like Wednesday, Stranger Things, Dahmer, Bridgerton Season 1, The Queen's Gambit, Bridgerton Season 3, The Night Agent, I haven't heard of that one. Fool Me Once, haven't heard of that one either. Stranger Things 3, and Bridgerton Season 2. I mean, look, that's useful for shareholders because they put ads on the TV shows. But the movies, they do put ads in the movies, but it's like the movies have been much more questionable, and what do they actually bring to Netflix's bottom line? But shareholders are seeing the recovery of the box office, and they're like, hey, Netflix, why aren't you getting involved in some of that? And I'm going to pivot just briefly and mention, like, when Coda won the Oscar for Best Picture for Apple, what did Coda's win actually do for Apple? I mean, I don't even think they reported numbers of people signing up for Apple TV Plus to watch Coda. All they did was basically hide this movie. It won Best Picture out of nowhere, and that's it. I guess you can still watch it if you're curious, but who's going to sign up for Apple TV Plus just for Coda? Movies as streaming originals don't make a lot of sense unless you are also selling theater tickets and physical media and premium video on demand sales. Now, if Netflix ever moves to like a credits or ticket system, well, then we might be having a different talk of the story. But yeah, Ted Sarandos is still pushing this narrative that they just have a different business model, and that, look, we make just as much money not selling tickets, and our movies are just as big as the billion-dollar hits, even though it's like, well, if they're billion-dollar hit movies, why aren't they making $1 billion? It's a conversation that's going to continue, and it's frankly very, very annoying. So anyway, that's going to be it for this podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the end, and since we did have a visual element, if you happen to experience this podcast with a visual element, tell me what you think of it. Does it help? Does it make you more likely to subscribe to the podcast? I would like to know. And if you're listening to audio, I'd still like to hear about all your opinions on these things. Have you seen any of these movies? Do you like them? Do you not like them? Do you think Netflix is leaving too much money on the table? So if you can leave a comment on one of the platforms that have comments, that would be great. And if this is your first time here and you like what you have to hear, hey, let's make it official. Subscribe to the podcast. We're on all the podcast forums, like, obviously YouTube and Spotify and Apple and Deezer and Apple. We're on all of them. So thank you so much for listening, and I will be seeing you at the movies. Take care. Hey, you made it to the end. Thank you so much for making it to the end. Just a few more things. First of all, the names that you see on the screen, these are our Patreon and YouTube member supporters, and I thank each and every one of them. Their support helps me make exclusive videos for Patreon and YouTube members, as well as keep the channel running, and of course is just a huge kindness to me. Also, don't forget to check out the iCriticLive podcast on Spotify, Apple, Google, Deezer, whatever podcasting service you listen to, it is there. We definitely want to see you there. And hey, there's also other videos that you can check out. So, check out these other channels, these other videos, especially that one. I think that's a really good one.